I warmly welcome you to the second day of our conference on gender, money and finance. Today we will continue with session 3, and I'm pleased to reflect with women from academia and in management functions on the question whether risk-taking is gender-specific, and if so, what lessons we can draw. My name is Karin Turner-Hrdlicka. I'm Director of the Department for the Supervision of Significant Institutions at Oesterreichische Nationalbank, and I have the honor to be the moderator of this session. In this session, we have the advantage of having not only 4, but even 5 distinguished speakers. And I already mentioned that the academic and management perspective is represented in our panel, but we also represent different cultural and geographical backgrounds, and we cover time zones from the United States to Saudi Arabia. So I can promise you a very exciting afternoon, and I'm sure that we will have a lot of food for thought and input for rich discussion. And I kindly invite you to raise any comments and questions you have. We will collect them and address them after the presentations. Gender and risk-taking. Often in the economic literature, one can read general statements in the sense that men are more willing to take risk than women. Or in other words, that women are more risk-averse than men. So we already had a teaser on this aspect in yesterday's discussion when reference was made to the Lehman Sisters debate. So to the question whether the financial crisis would have happened in another way if there had been women to take the decisions at Lehman Brothers. There is also research at the IMF showing that a higher proportion of women on the boards of banks and financial supervision agencies is associated with greater stability. Moreover, the MSCI Europe Women's Leadership Index, so representing companies which are leading in terms of female representation in management position, outperforms the standard MSCI Europe Index. And finally, in some studies, it's also argued that women are more likely to invest in sustainable and social areas. And we all know that the issue of sustainability, particularly when it comes to climate change, is currently very on the top of the political agenda on global level. So at the same time, all the data show that women are still substantially underrepresented in the financial world, especially when it comes to managerial and leadership functions. And I can also confirm this from my own experience in several meetings with banks management. There are hardly women at all represented, and if so, they are in the minority. So the question we would like to address in this panel today are, first, is there a gender difference with regard to risk-taking? By nature? By average? Not at all? And is this just a stereotype? Or is there also the aspect of selection effects to be considered? Second, would a better gender mix affect financial firms' decision-making, risk behavior, and social responsibility? And third, what are gender-specific obstacles for women to attain leading positions in financial firms, and how can they be overcome? So we will start our panel with the academic perspective, and I could not imagine more qualified persons to address these questions than our first 2 speakers, Professor Julie Nelson and Professor Renée Adams. So turning to Julie first. Julie is Professor Emerita of Economics at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Her research interests include feminist economics, economic methodology, ecological economics, ethics and economics, and the empirical study of household and individual behavior. She is a former associate editor of Feminist Economics, past president of the Association for Social Economics, and editor of the Economics and Business Ethics section of the Journal of Business Ethics. So, Julie, we are particularly glad to have you here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karin. I am so honored to be here in this distinguished company and be invited. It is, however, dangerous to ask an academic to give a short talk, but I will try my best in the next few minutes to give you some highlights from my research that are relevant to two questions listed in the motivation for this conference. The first one is risk behavior gender specific? The second one is, would a balanced gender mix in policy institutions make for better decisions? Now, you might think that the answer to the second question follows from the first, but that's not quite the case. First question, is risk behavior gender specific? Absolutely not. The data is against that idea. Now, that might seem surprising because there's all this literature out there claiming that women are more risk averse than men. This turns out to be because of a lot of confusion about language, some poor use of statistics, and a great deal of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, which is common to all human beings, is a tendency to see only evidence that supports our strong beliefs and to literally not see evidence that goes against them. So let me share a few slides here. If I can get to the right window. Are you seeing, oops, that's the wrong slide. Slide that says gender specific suggests, I hope. Okay. So that question, is risk behavior gender specific, suggests that there is a women's style of risk taking and a men's style of risk taking. If we think of the horizontal axis here as saying more risk off to the right, we think of men are in a more risk-taking group, women in a less risk-taking group, or a categorical difference. And actually a good deal of this academic literature that says women are more risk-averse than men actually goes on to claim that this is some kind of essential or fundamental difference, a real distinguishing difference between men and women. Now, let's look at what the actual data analysis does. People say women are more risk averse than men, and what they really mean is the following. In our sample, that is, they're never looking at a random sample of men and women from all around the world to find out what is essential. They're always looking at some kind of subset. We maybe, I'll come back to the maybe later on, found a statistically significant difference. There's some problems with those words there. Statistically significant should really be statistically detectable. We put the word significant in there, people tend to believe large and important, and that's not the case, as I will show you. Statistically, what do we mean by difference? Difference in between an individual man and an individual woman, difference on average, essential difference, what do we mean? And then the words that really get left out in that women are more risk averse than men statement is that this is about the mean risk aversion, the average risk aversion between men and women, with women on average being more risk averse. So while that claim and this idea that there's a whole bunch of academic literature to back it up tends to get us thinking this way, if you actually look at the data on most behavioral and even some physical differences, or so-called differences between men and women, the picture looks a lot more like this. At the top here is a stylistic representation of men's and women's heights. So the dark line a little bit to the right is men's heights. The dashed line is the distribution of women's heights. We know that men on average are taller than women. So X bar M, the male average, is more further to the right than X bar F, the female average. And the bell curve is highest in the middle because most men are somewhere around average. And the bell curve is low at the ends because very few men are either very tall or very short. And similarly for women. But if you look at the diagram on the bottom, this is also a diagram in which men on average are higher than women. But in this case, it's that difference is a whole lot smaller. There is far more overlap than difference in the bottom graph. Now you might say, well, the first will be statistically significant and the second won't, and that is not the case. Statistical significance does depend on the size of the effect, but it also depends on the sample size. Something like a difference in heights will show up as statistically significant, even in fairly small sample sizes, maybe 20 or 30. More subtle, substantively small differences will show up in statistical analysis if your sample is big enough. And some of these studies of gender and risk had samples in the hundreds or even thousands, particularly if they used survey data or actual investment data. So if we think of what is the distribution of risk preferences among men and women, it could turn out to be categorical. It could turn out to be something detectable in normal life, like heights. We don't need research to know that men are higher than, on average, taller than women. We observe that. Or it could be smaller, like this bottom graph, where we probably don't see it in real life. Also note that if we're talking about a distribution like that in the bottom graph, and you are presented with an individual woman, what do you know about her risk preference? It's possible that her risk preference is below men's average. That is, some of the dotted line curve lies below X bar M. But it's also pretty darn likely, almost as likely, that she will be above the average man in risk preference. So if you're comparing a man and a woman and you don't know where in the distribution they are, you know virtually nothing about them. Sex is would be a very weak indicator of risk aversion. So what happened when I did actually two meta-analyses of the literature, somewhat different kinds of articles in each, but a meta-analysis is you go back and you look at, your data really is a whole bunch of articles, and I went back and I, in some cases using the published information, some cases we asked the authors to send us their data and recrunched it. And for the most part, well, actually just about everybody would claim women are more risk averse than men simply on the basis of statistical significance. I went back and added to that the calculation of Cohen's d, the kind of value you see here. And what did I find? This was from about 35 studies. A negative sign, like you see at the top, means in that study, women took more risks than men. Okay, the counter stereotype result. NSS means not statistically significant. That is, the sample size was too small relative to the size of the effect for us to draw any conclusions. So that is really inconclusive. And then Cohen's d that are positive mean that men took more risk than women. The reason you see a range for a number of these studies is that a number of the studies will look at a number of different samples, say different countries or different occupations, or may try to measure risk using different experiments or questions. So we see that there's a lot of inconclusive evidence more than halfway down this table. Okay, there's a whole lot of findings that really don't support, and there's a few findings that actually go the other direction, women taking more risks than men. Now look at Cohen's d. Is that more like heights, or is that more like that second graph we looked at? We really see a lot more down around maybe the 0.35. We see nothing up around the 2.6. And in fact, if you do a hypothesis test about the idea that Cohen's d might be equal to 2, it's soundly rejected statistically all the way down. So it is, really statistically proven, if you look at the data, the difference between men's and women's mean risk aversion, even when it shows up, and it doesn't always show up, is quite small. I'm not going to go into the index of similarity here, but for some data, you can calculate how much the distributions overlap. This is the proportion of overlap. So we see we can get up to 96 or 91, 93% overlap between men and women's distributions, and yet the emphasis is all put on difference. Which brings me to the next point. But while men and women really aren't all that different, are really much more similar than different, there is a huge investment and bunch of energy going out there to try to maintain the stereotype. This whole literature tends to fall into interpreting statistical significance as large difference and making these linguistic statements that do not reflect the actual study done. I have many examples of this in my papers and book, but I will just present one here to give you an example. So here is some actual data from a study. This was a study of fund managers in 4 different countries. And they had a survey asking people to self-evaluate themselves. 1 very risk-averse, 6 not very risk-averse. And this was the biggest result they got over all 4 countries. You see D is about 0.4, which is relatively large compared to the other on the tables. So this is about as big as the risk difference gets. Do you see a different style here between men and women? If you look at the very risk-averse category, actually the only person in there is a man. And there's huge overlap here. A little different in shape, yes, that's why the mean turned out to be statistically significantly different, but huge overlap. Now, the authors of this only found this difference in means in 1 out of the 4 countries studied. The other 3 countries gave entirely inconclusive results. And yet the article in the end claims a victory for gender difference and suggests that female investors be paired with female investment advisors. That is, they looking only at statistical significance and not at their data, because that would be uncomfortable. Only at statistical significance, they include there is a female style and a male style. So I find this very disturbing as an empirical person who hoped that my colleagues in economics and behavioral economics and psychology would be a little bit more careful about how they use statistics. But this is the state of the art. At least up until, recently there's been a few changes. I first published this in about 2012, and there have been some people who have picked it up and are now doing better work. But it still tends to be, from papers I'm reviewing, the dominant case. So given that women don't really, if you put out, you choose an individual woman to put on a board, how much is that going to change the risk aversion on the board? You have no idea. You have no idea what any individual woman's risk aversion is going to be. And as Renée Adams will talk about, you probably got a pretty good chance that she's actually going to be a lot more male style than female style. Because there is no style. Okay, there's only these distributions. So let's go on to the, actually, let me summarize here. I know I'm going through fast, so I did write out my conclusions just to make sure I was clear on them. I hope this doesn't go on too long, but my meta-analysis of over 50 studies showed that researchers sometimes find a statistically significant difference in the expected direction, but sometimes they don't. Even when a study does find the expected difference between average men and average women, the size of the difference between average men and average women is trivial compared to the differences among men and the differences among women. The connection between sex and risk preferences is extremely weak. I'm glad I put in this notes of summary because I forgot to mention, when I looked at only the studies that were the most reliable, the most precise, that is looked at the biggest samples, the Cohen's d was about 0.13. So our best estimate of risk aversion from all of these studies is that about little over a tenth of a standard deviation of difference. You expect to see bigger numbers, both positive and negative, as the sample size gets small, because your estimates are worse in small sample sizes. But this is the most reliable estimate. Men and women are far more similar than different. And the widespread belief that women are more risk averse than men is rooted in sexist stereotypes and encouraged by an inadequate grasp of statistics, misleading use of language, and confirmation and publication bias. I haven't talked about the publication bias here, but I do in my written work. So now on to the second question, and I will be briefer on this, so I won't go way over my time. Would a balanced gender mix in policy institutions make for better decisions? You might think my answer would be no, because, hey, men and women are just about the same. But that's not the case. And the reason, other people have mentioned other reasons why it's not the case, but the main reason I believe it's not the case is because even while men and women, the differences are small, very small between the distributions, gender is a very important cognitive organizer or cognitive schema, as psychologists call it. It organizes the way we think of a lot of things that have nothing to do really with men and women. For example, cats and dogs. Most people think of cats as somehow more feminine, dogs more masculine. Has nothing to do with the gender of the dog or the owner. It's just a cognitive association. Or colors like pink and blue. I could give a lot of other examples. But this extends to fields of life and to academic fields. So finance and economics have become increasingly associated with markets, risk-taking, individuality, achievement, efficiency, competition. Gender stereotypes of all of that are masculinity. What gets left out? If we focus on markets, we forget about effects on society. Focus on risk-taking, we forget about appropriate caution. Focus on individuality, we forget about interdependence. Focus only on achievement, forget about also being trustworthy. Focus on efficiency, we forget about building resilience. Focus on competition, and we forget about cooperation and community. Think of all of those latter things I mentioned. Those are all stereotypically associated with femininity. Would a balanced gender mix in policy institution make for better decisions? I would say definitely yes. It's obviously not because women bring something different in risk preferences. I've just shown that that's not the case. But the fields of economics and finance have long been cognitively associated with male leadership and a certain kind of macho, I'd even say locker room atmosphere, where men have to prove their masculinity to each other by staying to those masculine roles. And that includes risk-taking and competitive individualism. If we could discard both the social, as between men and women, and the cognitive biases that exclude feminine aspects of human life, not just women's life, but human life, that would allow a more comprehensive set of human traits and interests, including concerns with safety and trustworthiness, to be appreciated and enacted by all leaders. And that would lead to better decisions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Julie, for your very clear words and your clear no and your clear yes on the other hand. So I would like to immediately continue with Professor Renée Adams, as she is the second academic at our panel. Renée is a professor of finance at Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. She is a fellow of the European Corporate Governance Institute and a senior fellow at both the Foundations of Law and Finance Research Center at Goethe University and the Asian Bureau of Finance and Economic Research. Renée's interest in diversity is, however, not limited to research. She also co-founded EFFECT, the American Finance Association's Committee for Women, and she chaired it until 2020. So Renée, thank you very much that you could make yourself available to join our panel today. And I'm very interested to have your perspectives on this issue and whether you share here Julie's conclusions.
Thanks very much for inviting me. You can't even imagine how great of a pleasure it is to be in the same panel as Julie, who's made very important observations on this whole issue about risk aversion. Okay, so my view on this, I'm basically just going to dig a bit deeper. Let me just preview what I'm going to be saying. So on the first question, would a better gender mix affect financial firms' decision-making, risk behavior, and social responsibility? My answer is going to be, I have no idea. And my second answer is going to be, I'm not sure we should care. Okay, and I'll explain why, right? So I'm going to be a bit provocative here, but you know, get the juices flowing. The second point is, regarding gender-specific obstacles for women to attain leading positions in financial firms. So my view on this is financial firms have particular problems. So they have all the problems other firms have, but there are also particular problems that other firms don't have. So this is, of course, an issue. And how may they be overcome? Well, it's difficult, but I think COVID has taught us that there may be ways forward. Okay, so on the first question, why do I say I don't know? Well, I have very similar observations as Julie has. And so let me talk about risk behavior. And basically, I'm just going to highlight the point that Julie made, that it really depends where you are in the distribution. Okay, so to talk about, general risk aversion of women versus men you have to be very careful, A, in generalizing, as Julie pointed out, and B, you have to be very careful thinking about who you're talking about. Okay, so what I have on this slide, which I hope you can see, and wave your hands if you can't, is I've plotted risk aversion measures for directors of listed companies. Okay, so this is survey data from Sweden. And the measure of risk aversion I have is called security. And what I've plotted is residuals of security after controlling for things that people think are very related to risk aversion, such as income, number of children, and marital status and age. Okay, so this is a pretty, I would say, a pretty good measure of risk aversion if you believe in these measures, right? So in this top panel here, what I've plotted is the risk aversion measures for women on the left and men on the right. Okay, now you see right here is 0, and the bar here for the women is below 0. That means, well, and let me just say, and the bar for men is above 0, slightly above. Since this is negative, it means women are less risk averse than men. Okay. So even using averages, I can make Julie's point that it's not clear that women are more risk averse than men. And the important point here is that these are directors of listed companies. Okay, so now let me cut the data in a way that's relevant to this question about financial firms. On the right here, what I've done is I've taken these directors and I've divided them into directors of financial firms and directors of non-financial firms. And in the top panel, I'm only looking at men. Okay, so I'm comparing men who are directors of financial firms to men who are not. Now, what you see is that the men in finance, again, this is 0, are slightly less risk averse than the men who are not in finance. I would say that this makes sense, right? Because we think of finance as a field where associated with risk-taking, exactly as Julie pointed out, right? So it makes sense that the male directors in financial firms are less risk-averse than the male directors who are not in financial firms. Okay, so now I do the exact same exercise for the women. And you note here that, the men in financial firms are, they're less risk averse than the men who are not, but this difference is not large. Now, down here, I do the same thing for the women, and you see that the picture is extremely dramatic. So what you see here is that the women who are on the boards of financial firms are significantly less risk averse than the women who are not on the boards of financial firms. Right, so men who are in finance are not very different from men who are not in finance, but women who are in finance are exceptionally different from women who are not in finance. As a result of this, if you compare men and women on the boards of financial firms, you see that the gender gap that was in the overall set of directors actually magnifies. Right, so the women who are on the boards of financial firms are significantly less risk averse than the men who are on the boards of financial firms. Okay, so this is exactly the opposite of the standard story. The Lehman Sisters story is we need more women on the boards of financial firms because they'll reduce risk. So what I'm showing you is it can go the other way, right? The women are actually relatively less risk averse than the men. And you may say, well, how is this possible? Well, the answer, of course, is selection, right? So the women who enter into the finance industry are going to be different than the women who don't enter into the finance industry. Okay, so let me make a similar point about social responsibility. So what's a social responsibility argument? So people argue that if we have more women on boards, there'll be more social responsibility. And the argument is related to this idea that women are more other regarding, right? So caring about social responsibility is caring about others. And since we say that women are more other regarding, that means, you know, of course, we're going to have more social responsibility if we have more women on the boards. Okay, but the selection effect works here too. Right, and so let me illustrate this again with data on directors of listed corporations. So what I'm plotting in this graph is something called universalism. It's a measure of other regarding preferences. Now, in this graph right here, I've plotted the average difference between women and men in the population as measured in the World Value Survey. Okay, so this is the difference between women and men, and here we have 0, the bars to the right. That means women in the population are more other regarding than men in the population. And here I'm just talking averages, right, for the sake of illustrating. So of course I acknowledge Julie's points, but just for the sake of illustration, I'm just showing averages. Now here I'm going to do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare female directors to the women in the population. So this bar right here represents the difference between other regarding preferences as measured by universalism and of directors, female directors versus the women in the population. Here we have 0, the bars to the left. That means female directors are less other regarding than the average woman in the population. Okay, now down here I do the same thing for the men. Now, male directors are also less other regarding than the average man in the population. So basically, in general, I guess that evidence shows that directors are less other regarding than sort of the average person on the street. Okay. Now, you put the two together, and here what I have is the gender difference in other regarding preferences for directors. So this is a difference between female directors and male directors. And here we have 0, the bar is to the left. So female directors are less other regarding than male directors. Okay, now this difference is not statistically significant, right? And so basically this says there's no difference between the directors in this sample in terms of their other regarding preferences. And what explains this? You know, so in the population, we see women are more other regarding. But on the board, they're not. Well, again, it's the selection, right? So you can imagine that for a woman to achieve a board position, you may not necessarily get there by being super nice to everyone, especially if there are barriers to overcome. Okay, so regarding this question, would a better gender mix affect financial firms' decision-making, risk behavior, and social responsibility? My answer is maybe yes, maybe no. There may be better decisions, there may be worse decisions. There may be more risk, there may be less risk, maybe more CSR, maybe less. I don't know. And the answer is, why is that? Because selection matters, right? So you have to understand the situation that you're talking about. You can't just generalize. Okay, so let me just briefly touch on the second 2 points. You know, are there gender-specific obstacles for women to attain leading positions in financial firms? And the answer is yes. So the stereotypes that Julie's been talking about, that I've been talking about, of course, those are barriers, right? But there are also additional finance-specific barriers. And one important barrier is the idea that, you know, there's also biases around women's ability to do math. Right, so finance is a very math-intensive field. It's a STEM field, even though it's not necessarily always classified as such. And those biases matter. But also there's evidence that the structure of work in finance is a barrier to women's advancement, right? And so, you know, if you have jobs like in investment banking where it's expected that you work 100 hours a week, obviously that's going to be very difficult for women with careers responsibilities for women to progress in such a position. So how may these barriers be overcome? Well, of course, this requires a willingness to question whether the structure of work is due to culture or whether jobs are in fact indivisible. I should point out that I think COVID has provided some insight into this because people are realizing that you can actually change how you work. So I'm very interested to see how the industry develops going forward in this respect. So I don't have any specific insights here, but I think there's some, you know, things are happening and changing. Okay, so to conclude, regarding this question, you know, would a better gender mix affect financial firms' decision-making, risk behavior, and social responsibility? I said in the beginning that my answer is I don't know. I also said that I'm not sure I care. Why did I say that? I actually think this is the wrong question. So I think we should be asking whether financial firms will benefit from debiasing and removing barriers for advancement. And I think the answer to that question is clearly yes. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Renée, for sharing the results of your research with us. I think it's extremely interesting to see from both presentations that research and data so far do not provide any evidence that there is clear difference in risk aversion between men and women, that there are a lot of stereotypes, that we are faced with selection bias, and that still there is a case to remove barriers in order to allow for more diversity also in the financial area. And I would like to continue on this and to focus now particularly also on the barriers we face today in turning now from the academic to the management perspective. And I would like to welcome in this respect Becci McKinley Rowe. She is global co-head of fundamental equities at BlackRock. She is co-chair and member of several executive committees, and in her function inter alia responsible for business strategy, investment performance, and talent management. Becci is also the sponsor of Women in Investments for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And prior to joining BlackRock, she spent 20 years at Morgan Stanley. So, Becci, I'm very interested on your views on the and practical experience in diversity matters, and where do you see, again, also from your experience, obstacles and barriers for women to attain leading positions in financial firms? What are your experiences? What is your advice in this respect?
I am delighted to be here. Professor Renée Adams and Professor Julie Nelson, I could actually listen to you both for the 90 minutes that we've got together. I really feel very privileged to be on a panel with everybody today. And thank you very much, Karin, for this event. I'm very pleased to be invited here. So I spent my entire career, so just short of 25 years in financial services, 20 at a US investment bank, and latterly and currently at an asset manager, again, a US firm, BlackRock, but very global. And it's interesting listening to you both present on the research in terms of the risk taking and is it gender specific? And clearly I haven't got any proprietary research. It's just my own experiences and anecdotal of 25 years of being in the industry. And my view is that, no, it is not gender specific. My viewpoint would be very much that, is it about the opportunity? And have we had enough women to be able to have the opportunity to be risk takers? And have we had the representation? You know, I know when I started in the industry, you know, senior women in the industry were few and far between. And the ones that were not necessarily role models that I aspired to be. Now, I do think the industry has come a long way. I think the representation is significantly better than when I started 25 years ago, but I still think there is a long way to go. And I think the key to all of this, and why I think businesses now get it, is because clearly diversity matters. And for us to be able to measure it, gender diversity is the way that we can really focus on things. And if I think in terms of sort of how we at BlackRock look at the gender diversity, it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's not because it reflects societies and communities we live in. It reflects our clients, our stakeholders, our shareholders, but it's the right thing to do for better business outcomes. And there has been so much research that we've seen over the last 20 years, which really demonstrates that diverse teams have better outcomes, better decision making, better solutions, better risk taking. And I think that doesn't come from, in my own view, that it's because women look at risk differently to men. And clearly the proprietary research demonstrated here has shown that. It's because if a room is full of people that all look the same, think the same experiences, same background, the outcomes are going to be the same. The decision making is going to be the same. So by having diverse teams, and if I think in EMEA at BlackRock and our operating committee in EMEA, we're 50% women, 50% men. And so therefore you get a broad representation of views. So I think that's the first thing that I would say through my experiences, is that having diverse teams, it actually has better business outcomes and better business results. To go to the point of the risk taking and risk decision making, I think the one thing that it does as well is that it enables people to actually bring their own perspectives to the table, to feel empowered, to make sure, what have we missed? What are we not discussing? Where could we be blindsided? What are we not doing? And again, that comes from different people, different experiences, different background, different perspectives on things. I might come into a meeting and I might have a very clear perspective on what I think the outcomes are, but then I hear from different other people's perspectives with different viewpoints, different experiences, and that could also either change my view or it could actually make me more steadfast in my opinion. So for me as a business leader, diversity is critical because I want to know the unknown. I want somebody to bring the fresh perspective, and you could only do that by having diverse teams. The other part that I think diversity is important when we talk about the opportunity, and I know Renée, you mentioned that a little bit as well. If I think about the women that I've met throughout my career, I would not say that, you know, women are adverse risk takers, but I do think that their views come with the values are very high in terms of when I interview women, they do want to know that their values are linked with the values and the principles and the culture of the firm. And again, that is only adding to that culture of an organization. So I get asked a lot more in terms of the sort of the values and the principles from female candidates than maybe I do from male candidates. The other part that I think is important, and I referenced this in the beginning, was role modeling and that representation, because I think it is incredibly important that people can look at an organization and actually look up and think, I would like to be like that person, or I would like to do that role. And is there anyone in this organization that looks like me? Is there anybody that is in this organization that acts like me? And I think that the financial services industry has progressed over the last several years in making sure that it is far more inclusive than maybe it was been historically. Now, I spent 20 years on an investment bank trading floor. And I can honestly say that my personal experience has been nothing but positive throughout my career. But as I got more senior, I also realized that other people did not have such positive experiences, and other people were left out of business opportunities. They were left out of getting that next promotion. They were left out of that stretch assignment. And so I got very involved in really championing women in the industry and getting more people into the industry, because for me as a woman, I'm a mum, I'm married, and I've got a little boy, and I've loved my job and I love my career. And I've managed to get the view where I feel I do a great job as a mum and I do a great job in my role. And I would just like more women to have the same experiences that I'm having. So I've been very involved for the last 15 years in terms of advancing more women to come into the financial services industry, because it can work and it can be really fulfilling. The one thing I think over the last 15 months, which worries me slightly, is the research that's recently coming out where the pandemic has actually potentially taken women a step back in terms of representation in the workplace, because in majority, a lot of women became sort of the child carers at home, you know, with homeschooling, all of the work that they were doing around home, trying to juggle their job, that more women in a survey that came out in April 2020 are really thinking about sort of the next steps in their career and can they do it and what's the steps going forward. My personal hope is that it's transitory. And as we navigate out of the pandemic, and we can all, with societies, hopefully get to the other side of this, that we can make sure that we can get that representation of women into the workplace, and we can continue on the path ahead. The other part that I would say, which I think is interesting, is that when we actually look in terms of measurement, and we actually look in terms of what businesses are doing. And I think a lot of organizations have programs, and a lot of organizations on paper, you know, they're doing a lot for gender within an organization. But I would want organizations to look at the output. It's fine to have a talented female program, you know, the next generation program, that you're investing in your female talents across all types of institutions. But the question is the so what? Are those people getting the next role? Are those people being promoted? Are those women getting the next stretch assignment? And I think that measurement of these programs, of are they leading to success and are they leading to a greater representation around that leadership table, I think is incredibly important. The other few things, just on, you mentioned, Karin, on the sort of the go forward, I think the language that is used in organizations is incredibly important as well, in terms of empowering women when they have a seat at the table. And the president of BlackRock always says, if you've got a seat at the table, use it, i.e. everybody has a voice and everybody will be listened to and we're all equal. If you're at the table, it's all equal. Is that the same across the board? Or I remember when I first started in the industry, there was very clearly the decision-making group, which was a small group of people, even though there might have been several people around the table. So it's about how the chairs of these meetings, how people are being brought into the conversation so that there is equality at that table. And Professor Renée, you mentioned that with COVID and the pandemic, you know, what could we take out of it in terms of maybe the environment for women being better going forward, and we can take lessons from it. I think the fact that we're all little tiles on a screen has really democratized meetings, because when you're in a physical boardroom, it's very clear that the focus is on the hierarchy and the sort of the seniority. When we're all virtual and everybody is the same size tile on a screen, that means that everybody, it's equalizing and it's democratizing. And I think that has empowered a lot of women to feel that they have got that rightful voice at the table. The other part that I think is quite interesting, and I recall this again very early on in my career, where you would have individuals, mostly men, which would be talking about how they could sort of elevate female talent. And then they would talk about the sort of the next big role and who the contenders would be. And they'd name a female and they'd say, yeah, let's take a risk on Helen, or let's take a risk on Karin. And they'd all sort of agree. And I remember saying, why on earth would you say take a risk? Because by saying take a risk, you're not endorsing Karin to succeed. You're implying there is downside, because it's a risk by putting them into that role. And instead of setting them up for success, you're potentially setting them up that if it doesn't work out, you can feel great that actually we took a risk and it didn't work out with Karin. You know, the much better language, and again, working at an American firm at BlackRock, the language used is, we'll pass the ball to Karin. You know, it's Karin's time to jump up and grab the ball and run with it. And again, it's empowering, and it's much more around putting people on the equality status of Karin is next in line for that next role. She's earned it, she's deserved it, and you can guarantee if Karin is being discussed in that room for the next big role, she's worked harder than anyone else, and she's probably achieved a lot more than anyone else. So I think the language that's used at the senior management level, it's really important that that is about empowering and setting up for success. The only other thing that I would mention is accountability. And I do think that it's the accountability in terms of the messaging top down. You hear it a lot at senior level in organizations, but there is a disconnect between the top and the bottom. And I think really for us to move the agenda forward in terms of diversity and female representation in positions of boards or leading businesses or running businesses, running team in risk-taking positions. You know, my career has been in investment banking and now obviously in investments in asset management. It's about setting up more people to be able to take on those roles. And that comes from accountability from the top of the house, right down to division heads, right down to hiring managers, right down to team leaders. And it's about making sure that everybody feels that they've got that equal opportunity set. So for me, everybody has a part to play in it. I actually think financial services plays to a lot of strengths that women can bring to the table. But I think it is about having that role modeling, that representation, and it's about having those opportunities. And it's about women not feeling that they've got to be like men and have men characteristics to succeed. It's about what they bring to the table, their skills, and how they can lead, how they can manage, and how they can elevate. So I'm really looking forward to hearing to the rest of the panel. We've got, I think, 2 more to go, but I'm thoroughly enjoying listening to all of the esteemed partners on this call. So back to you, Karin.
For sharing your experiences based on your impressive career. And for your plea on more diversity and for stressing the aspects of opportunity, role model, and empowerment. And the term role model directly brings me to our next speaker, to Khlood Aldukheil. Khlood has more than 25 years of experience in financial advisory and investment banking. She is currently the founder and CEO of Emerita Financial Company, an entity for corporate finance activities, and she's also a founding partner of Aldukheil Financial Group, engaged in investment banking activities. She holds several engagements at the Saudi Council of Chambers, the Riyadh Chamber of Commerce. She is audit committee chairperson for Saudi Oryx and a board member of CIMA Rating, the first credit rating agency in the Saudi Kingdom. Previously, Khlood worked at the World Bank, and she is the first Saudi female to be awarded the CFA in 2003. So, Khlood, we are extremely thankful to have you here today as a real female pioneer in Saudi finance. And we are very interested to hear and learn from your experiences. I mean, the Arabic world is not particularly known for extensive women's rights and gender parity. And if I'm not wrong, it's just a couple of years ago that women were not allowed to drive a car. So I believe we are all very interested in your career path, how you managed to achieve such an extraordinary career in a male-dominated society. And maybe you can tell us also about the environment you are working in and whether there are also changes for women to be observed in the Saudi Kingdom.
Thank you, Karin, very much. First, of course, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak. I am extremely honored and so happy, and almost most of what has been said today and yesterday resonates with me, and I keep adding my points. it brings me to the conclusion that I always think of is that women issues is a global issue. And us being here together is just an example of how coming together from different corners of the world, talking about the same issues, is very effective and very powerful. So thank you also for the introduction. I'm not sure if we have time to put the slide that I gave you. If you think we have time, it's great. If not, I'm gonna skim through a few points. First of all, Ms. Lagarde is, I think, my role model, and I didn't get a chance to tell her, but when she came to Saudi Arabia 2 years ago, she had asked the governor that I need to see women. So we had a very small gathering, and it was so honorable, and it was amazing. Yesterday, she said something that resonated with me. She said, her opening remark was, we are really in a bad position in terms of women participation. And I was thinking, this is so true. The positive thing about this message is that the issue is actually universal. And although I am impressed every day by more and more women getting engaged, participating, I tend to think that the issue is still there. So when we have someone like Ms. Christina Lagarde, who is a maker in opportunities for women and has been there, done that, and comes and confirms that we are still not represented well, this confirms that this is a universal global issue. This is one. The negative side of the sentence, or I would say challenge, because I don't believe in the word negative at all, actually. The challenge is, what do we need to do now? We need to come up with new tools in order to solve this. We need to come up with practical solutions rather than continue to reinvent the wheel on women issues, working in silos in different countries, and then ending up every day at the same place we were in the past. So I think that, you know, I'm sure everybody has heard the saying, if you keep doing the same thing, you won't get a different result. So I thought about this sentence, and I think it is inspiring for us to do something different now. I want to just quickly, for the sake of background and giving you an insight on what's happening in Saudi Arabia. And I've been in the financial sector for many years. I have always been the only woman in the board room, and I still am in many ways. And I have what I call it double trouble, where you have to live through emotional fear and anxiety. Where do you sit in the table when you're the only woman? And you know, and later I realized that they are probably more shy than I am meant to deal with you. And this is really the past. Today, Saudi Arabia is another country. I feel we had switched the light off and on again, and we have completely revolutionized the country. I have been always going around speaking about women empowerment, basically speaking about my journey, you know, similar to Becci. You know, the financial sector is the first sector that hired women in the private sector in Saudi, because the first employer of women in Saudi was the government in education and healthcare in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and only in the late 80s or literally early 90s that women started working, and it was more of the social mix rather than regulation. We are a young society, previously traditional. Women, believe it or not, did not seek careers, did not feel going out of the house beyond marriage is something that is, you know, sought out. So I did this slide that I've been going for years talking about, and I think this really reflects the transition of women in Saudi Arabia. Now, when I talk about changes for women in Saudi, I cannot really isolate it from changes of the society. And so I divided it into pre-King Abdullah era. May God rest his soul. I believe that he is the beginner of the social change in Saudi in 2005. Before King Abdullah, from the inception of the kingdom in 32 until I would say 2005, I called it the standstill era, where really I have chosen 3 criteria that were the impediments and later are the enablers for women empowerment: social, people socially did not think that women should go out. Women themselves did not think that they should go out or seek a career. They were definitely not encouraged or allowed to be in mixed environment with the backdrop of the religious interpretation. Education was very poor for both men and women, but even women more so, because they were not allowed to go into, they weren't not allowed, there weren't degrees, certain degrees like architects or engineers, because they thought, where are they going to work? And regulations, of course. The most significant of is lack of inability to drive, which is, alhamdulillah, was abolished in 2018. Things like, you know, you needed the male guardian, things like, so these, most of them, if not all of them, were not written regulations. They were social norms that people upheld so much, because we're a tribal society, that it felt like it was written, actually. And only until women in 2000, in 94, that, or sorry, 1990, the Gulf War, that went driving and asking, you know, for driving a few women, which my relatives were part of, that after this incident that they went and actually wrote a regulation for that. But previously, there was nothing written against women. Then King Abdullah became king in 2005. In his inauguration speech, he said, all government agencies to immediately open sections for women. And then we have the National Committee for Women established by a royal decree, and I was part of it. The objective of this committee was to empower women in the private sector. Now, a lot of this is not known to the world because the country itself was closed. We had no impact on social media. Our culture was extremely reserved. So I believe that the change in women is really driven by the underlying ecosystem, which I will conclude later is what we are changing now or needs to be changed. So 2005 to 2015, when King Abdullah died, we had marvelous change in economic change. Now, social was a step lower, but really the emphasis was on economic diversification, a lot of these huge projects. 2015, King Salman and the 2030 vision that we have now are short of a revolution. Now, the society itself has been really uprooted socially, politically, economically, and obviously the drive for this is economic sustainability through diversity of private sector. And the element of women was not really very clear in 2015-16 when the plan for the 2030 was launched. But early on in 2017, they realized the impact of inclusion of women in the economy, as they are the drivers for the SMEs, which have been identified as the drivers for the private sector, rebuilding that we're doing now. Now, many things happened in the same time, but women became on the agenda. And from the first quarter of 2017, we saw the first chairman of the exchange, Sarah Sahimi, elected a female, first CEO of a bank, Samba Citibank, female, first CFO of a Saudi bank. These are all my friends. I was also elected the first female for the president of the National Committee for Statistics, which is completely men. So the government started from the first quarter 2017, taking women with them on their official delegations and having a complete panel dedicated for women empowerment in Saudi. So what happened is that the government adopted this agenda that women are an issue and they need to be. Now, today, I am heading a committee for women empowerment. This is just a few months ago, and we are, inshallah, asking for many, many more changes. So the ball is rolling, as they say. The revolutionary era is categorized by a different political will. Is that okay, Khlood? For many years, for 15 years, you've been saying, women are changing, we're advancing. What's different between the plan of the previous administration, which really put women on paper, there as an objective in our 5-year development plan? Every year there's a section for women empowerment. What's the difference now? I say the difference is political will and implementation. I can write something, but if I don't give an implementable plan, then it is worthless. So today we are living in the revolutionary era, and alhamdulillah. So in conclusion on this part, and I said I'll give a background before I answer the questions, which I think will be more interesting. So today we can conclude that women, most of my presentations today, I'm addressing my request for women now to get up, to get involved, to develop their skills, to be more proactive. The regulations have abolished any restrictions for women employment, have enabled us to drive, and the social mindset has also changed. So on an education level, regulation level, social level, almost I can't say 100%, I would say literally 90% of impediments have disappeared. Now, the reality of the matter is what Ms. Christina Lagarde mentioned, is that we do have a scarcity in the skills for women. We do have unbiases there. We do have the challenge of balancing between a caretaker, unfortunately, which is on top of a woman's, the highest priority for many of us. We see less emphasis on participation to support the balance between, maternity or family, taking care, and career. So, but all of this I see is, alhamdulillah, going through a natural transitions. We are way, way before the West or developed economies, and we are looking really to learn from others, to take leaps and leaps, inshallah, faster. I want to go now to quickly just answering the questions, and I really loved all the different, the empirical evidence and the practical Becci experience, which I've faced always. And I do agree with Professor Renée about, I think it was, you said representation, or it was, no, selection. I called it skill and experience. So what I say is, okay, so the first question is, do we believe that having a gender mix affects the financial firm's decision? And I say any woman that survives the financial sector and escalates in the career must become diligent, must become very detailed oriented, because it is ruthless. This field is ruthless. And for you to survive as a woman, it's the nature of the beast. You will sharpen your skills. I mean, you will have to sharpen your skills. Now, making decisions is a function. I do believe gender brings something to the table because it represents the empathy, the energy, and dynamics of a woman's culture and society. This is true, but it's not 100. It's not efficient enough that I would say it does impact significantly the decision. What impacts it is education and experience and leadership skills, which I think is the same as what Professor Renée says, selection. It's not any woman on the board. Today in Saudi, I am fighting for 50% quota on every body that is announced, and they keep telling me, Khlood, but they're not qualified. I say, at this level, we are infant industry. I need to get more gender in, more females in, then we work on the skills and knowledge, because it's a chicken and egg situation. You have not exposed them to knowledge. We have more women than men that have higher degrees in the kingdom, but it's theory. If I don't have practice, whereas men, a lot of men have practice and are away from theory because they don't like to self-develop. I'm not sure why. But so women if you have the right combination of the right knowledge with the right skill and obviously the leadership skills, then yes, those individuals will have a significant difference in decision making, because as mentioned yesterday, decision making in committee settings where it's channel for diversified knowledge is what makes decisions more efficient. One. Risk-taking. I believe all humans are risk-takers, but I do believe that females have an instinct of being more diligent. And I think this is the caretaker instinct. On the same token, yes, they are risk-averse in the beginning based on knowledge. If they are not aware or are not knowledgeable of the matter, they are extremely risk-averse. Yet once they are knowledgeable of the matter, I believe that they are in the extreme risk-takers. And it was interesting what was mentioned yesterday about men, that they are, they are confident about things and about themselves and asking for a raise. And when they actually are, completely probably have no clue on the job description. Women are not like that. Women are more, so they are inherently, I think, more risk averse, but the minute they get the knowledge and the skill, then their confidence is more aggressive. I see myself, I am in 2 or 3 boards, I'm the only female. I can tell you the dialogue is completely different. I am always the first to object, obviously in the right direction. I am always not scared to say my opinion, and I have noticed significantly from the beginning, you know, these boards are 2-3 years. In the beginning of the board, everybody's shy to talk to me or to comment or to say we agree with her. Now in the end of the terms, it's amazing how they just jump to support you and their confidence. So I do feel that yes, we bring more comfort because we are able to we are good with people. CSR, social responsibility, it's in our blood. And I think that women, because they are caretakers and family takers and more closer to those that are in need in the society, are more sensitive to people's needs. I think this is really, we're born with this. However, when they enter the corporate world, they are shocked with the rigid structure of sustainability, which says profit over cost, obviously profit. So, and CSR really conflicts with profit because, you know, you need to, you are not encouraged to give money with no returns. So unless you have those sophisticated organizations which believe in ESG or sustainable goals or corporate governance or what have you, where I think women will be the first to jump on these programs and are creative because they are connected and detailed in raising kids, creative in developing the CSR programs and bring sustainability to them because they have long endurance. So I do believe there is a big difference in having women in terms of CSR program. Finally, before the last, what are gender specific obstacles? I think everybody in the world, when they interview a woman, would say, are you married? Are you going to have kids? What do you think of career? I mean, unfortunately, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy because these questions are based on real life scenarios. And it is a function of the existing society. In our society where women were not encouraged to work, I mean, the most objection that came from women driving was from women, believe it or not. And a lot of women don't want to work, don't want the hardship, cannot connect with the reason. If I have my income, why should I get out? If I'm not engaged in the society, if I'm not engaged in the economy, if I'm not engaged in politics, what is it in for me when I don't have an open society where I can mix and bounce my ideas? It's boring. It's just me, myself. And so all of this, the social setting has changed for both men and women, but more exciting for women because we were more isolated out of the society. So today we have an incentive to participate more. So now you see more girls, social media effect and what have you, you see more girls seeking jobs to contribute to the economy. They have that link. And then you have more women wanting to actually establish their own businesses for the right reasons, which is, you know, amazing. So the typical obstacles are these, you know, are typical obstacles for women reaching leadership positions. Obstacles for leadership positions, men or women, is the same. You have that element of leadership skills. I mean, you could have the knowledge and the experience, but don't have the leadership skills, so you will not escalate. But women have double the trouble because there is this perception which is fed by reality in our society that, you know, you're not included anyways in society, so you don't really have practical experience. It's theory. You still have marriage, you still have kids, you're emotional. Actually, I'm ashamed to say this, but 15 years ago, when I applied for Citibank in Saudi, they asked me in the interview application, if you had your period, would that not allow you to work? Citibank. So, and I was, what? No. And then the perception of physical, I was a relationship manager. I would go in the middle of the desert to see some pipes, water pipes, and then the head of corporate bank said, is it safe for you to go? I said, yes, because I would have to go with my driver in the middle of the desert. Of course, I didn't care. Of course, it was scary, but I got the job done. So, but that's just me. And I am brought up in a way to think like this. And I absolutely do not represent the typical Saudi in the past. Today, many women share my ideas. So, yes, we have obstacles. How do we overcome them? We need to change the ecosystem. How do we change the ecosystem? We have to change the underlying social setting by doing campaigns to shift the mindset. We've done it for water conservation. We've done it for really supporting groups. I mean, we could literally change the idea of the society with anything we want if we design it well. So we need to work on shifting the mindset. We need to engage the whole family in taking over the female typical job. It's not just a mom's job to take care of the kids. It has to be the whole family. We need to change the work environment from an organization point of view, that it cares about the family and not just the employee. It's the family's employee. And then, well, it releases the pressure from the female as an individual that you have to do the job. And I'm a single mom. Throughout my career, I was married with 3 girls, and I have always taken them to school. I have always put them to bed. I've always cooked. I was the super mom, and you can do it. And align the value creation of the organization with the enhanced employees' personal objectives. When I worked in the World Bank, which was just 1 year, this was in the 90s, I was very impressed how they offered yoga classes, French classes, Spanish classes. What does this have to do with us? And they're like, oh, no, you have to, this is your soft skills. You have to be happy. Of course, I never had time. And then commitment to hire more women. So we do need political decision from the top. I believe in quotas. I believe it's an infant industry. We need to make decisions to hire. I was speaking to a senior government official here that embarked on a program to employ women. And I said, how many women do you have? He said, oh, no, not yet, but we will. I said, 1. He said, within 1 year. I said, 30 days, I can hire for you any woman you want. What does it take? It's a decision, just a decision to make. And then a commitment to train for leadership skills. Obviously, we have the women, everybody's ready, have been there for a long time, but now we have, the good news is that you will find so many Saudis in so many positions and have always been there, women, qualified, ready to work, but they were not given the opportunity. Today, they are given the opportunity. Now the challenge is for us to upscale our skills in order to be able to deliver. Finally, a question was asked yesterday, can we end gender inequality? I say no, we cannot, but we can change its meaning. And I will call it to equal, we have to change it to equal but different, by using our energy, our empathy, our drive and creativity for a happy life. And thank you very much.
Much, Khlood, for giving us this overview of the changing role of and environment of women in the Saudi kingdom, and for showing us the energy you have and the plans and visions you have, and also the concrete ideas you have for going further down this path. It's very interesting to have these insights into the Arabic world, but now I would continue with moving again to Central Europe and turn to our last speaker, Gerda Holzinger-Burgstaller. Gerda launched her career at the Financial Market Authority before joining Erste Group in 2006. Between 2011 and 2019, she held several leading positions at the Erste Group Secretariat before becoming Chief Risk Officer and Chief Financial Officer of Erste Bank Österreich in 2019. And then finally, most recently in October 2020, she was appointed chair of the Erste Bank Österreich Executive Board. So she has made a very impressive career here in Austria. And Gerda, after your appointment as CEO of Erste Bank Österreich, journalists reported very extensively about your career step and also the fact that now there is a woman CEO of Erste Österreich. And I can remember several headlines that particularly focused on this aspect. So what I'm interested in is, what is your experience, or what was your experience in these weeks after your appointment, and where do we stand with regard to gender parity from your perspective also here in Central Europe, and how do you address this issue also at Erste Group?
Thank you very much, and I'm so delighted to be in this very distinguished panel. I learned a lot today, and I'm also so grateful for all the research that is now out there, because I think I am in the position, and many other women as well, that there is the preconceived opinion that we are less risk taking or more risk averse. And I don't know why, but it still happens that in very many discussions, always the more risk averse alternative is proposed first to women and not to men. So I think to have this research here, it's very, very appreciated. Thanks, Karin, for the introduction, and maybe also as a little bit of a background. Erste is around now for more than 200 years, and why I'm focusing on that is actually that it is already in our charter of foundation, where it says, and there, I'm just quoting it. Actually, it's our purpose is to give everyone without distinction of status, nationality, faith, gender, and age access to prosperity. So this sentence, more than 200 years old now, is already showing that we in Erste have quite a close relation to diversity, and we see that this is important. However, and there I have to be very open and transparent, irrespective of our purpose and the importance of diversity when it comes to customers, within Erste, we don't have this mature status. So we have actually the issue that because quotas have been mentioned, we decided to have a target for the end of 2019, and we were not able to reach this quota when it comes to women in leadership, which is a shame. There I have to be very honest. We've now even increased our target when it comes to senior management. In addition, then we have a separate target for junior and middle management. And of course, I think there is the clear objective to become or to have a balanced ratio when it comes to leadership at a certain point. And I think and please apologize that I'm not following all the details now that I've also presented in the slides that was sent out before. Because many of the issues have been said already and described already. So, but what I want to focus on is really this target setting. I think what is important is that it is something that is coming from the top of the organizations, and it's not something that is standing next to the organization, but it's really something that is an integral part of the organization. So we are all used to, in the financial service community, we are used to target when it comes to operating results. We all used to cost income ratios and so on. There we have targets, and I think we also need to have targets when it comes to quotas, and this needs to be implemented very much in the KPI framework of every manager. So it's not something that you can have for the overall organization only, but you need to really break it down and have it also on other levels when it comes to promotion of women, when it comes to succession planning. So I think there is the key really to come also in a situation where you have a balanced team. What is also important, and I think this has not been mentioned so far, it's not only that I think there is really the benefits of cognitive diversity is undisputed. So it's not risk taking, being risk averse, being a risk taker, what is important, but it's this cognitive diversity what we are looking for as institutions, as banks. And I think in this context, we also saw in Erste that when it comes to innovation, it's really diverse teams that are performing best. So to have new ideas, to maybe think of the out-of-the-box thinking in diverse is much bigger than in homogeneous teams. And this is also something that we need to be or that we need to implement in our organizations, in particular, given all the fast changing environment that we are in. I think it was also a lesson learned out of the pandemic that we need to be very flexible when it comes to changing environments, changing challenges out there. And also with changes, I think diverse teams work much better. This is at least the very clear experience within Erste. And one additional aspect that has not been mentioned so far is also the war of talent. So we all face, as large institutions, the fact that we are constantly looking for new talents and looking really for the best people. And in that context, in particular in the CEE countries where there is some kind of a brain drain into other countries, so there are a lot of people moving, in particular well-educated people, and that's the reason why we of course have to use also the talents, the female talents, because otherwise we will not manage to get the best people. So it's not something that is because we are or we want to do good, because this is very often a prejudice when you talk about diversity. It's not, of course, it's about transforming the world to a better place, but we do this also seeing all the economic benefits next to it. And this is clearly something that we need as a senior management also include in all our thinkings. And for this, we have to make sure, and this has been mentioned today a lot often now, is really set the right framework. Yeah, we have to have the communication internally as well as externally, really to be inclusive. I think that's very important to make clear. That is something that is not only a headline in the organization, but it's also something that is lived. We also have to be very focused on diversity when it comes to all HR processes in place. So I think it's talent management, it's succession planning, it's really making sure that there is for parental leave, there is a clear management out. So what we try at Erste is that we keep in touch with the people that are on a parental leave, just really to that people have the feeling that they are still part of the organization. And I think that's important also when it comes then to the next step in the career, because otherwise if you completely stop at one point and come back after a few months, a few years, it might be more difficult to get back on a career path. That's something that we are working on. What we also do, and this is maybe in the in more in the context now of banking businesses, women in and financial literacy. So there we see a big room for improvement when it comes to our customers as well as our employees, our female employees. There we've realized that it might be, or in some cases it is necessary that we have different trainings focusing on different skills, on also when it comes to leadership skills. So very often men and women have other wishes there and other needs, and this we have to also consider as a bank and in our role to promote women. And maybe one last sentence, because I think we somehow run out of time, and then I'm not sorry because all the other presentations have been so exciting, and maybe we also have a little bit time of a few questions. One last sentence is really about role models in this area. I think, and this has been mentioned by Becci, we all who have maybe because of their skills, or because also of being the right person in the right place at the right time, and a little bit of luck, we are in the position that we can act as a role model, and we should really try to be a role model that is deserving the name and really pushing and promoting the idea of diversity. I think that's our responsibility, and with that sentence, I would like to end. Thank you very much, Karin.
Thank you very much, Gerda. We have to come to an end of our session, I believe, and I just checked my mailbox if there are any questions or comments. I have seen no questions, but I've seen some comments, and these all go in the same direction. Namely, they are very grateful that the issue of are women more risk averse, or men more willing to take risk, it was addressed in this session, and it was addressed in a way that it was clearly pointed out that there are a lot of stereotypes, that there are a lot of biases which are also again and again repeated, also in economic literature, and that we should really be careful when we talk about these issues, and take into account that there are differences among women and among men, and that we should not so much focus on a comparison where is the difference between men and women, but look at the individual persons. And this is a view I very much share. And I also take with me from this session that there is a strong case for more diversity in financial firms and institutions, that more diversity sharpens thinking and contributes to better decision making. And it's also important to highlight, and this has been clearly shown by all the contributions, that yes, we have achieved something and quite a lot already, but on the other hand, there is still a long road to go, and what we need are opportunities. We have to set and monitor targets. We have to take into account the aspect of financial education, and we have to think about empowerment and talent management. So a lot of issues we have to address, where we all have to think how we can contribute in the best way. Once again, I would like to thank all speakers for their participation, and also thank the virtual audience for your attention. Thank you and goodbye.